Good morning, everyone. My name is Gaurav Singh, and today we'll be uncovering the discovery or the mysteries of a multi-tenant platform. SaaS is basically a talk of the town right now, as you all know. You must have heard there are multiple cloud platforms, the SaaS platforms. So let's first identify what exactly is the SaaS model and how you can create your own. SaaS is basically a business model, that's it, where the companies don't sell the license of the software. They just sell subscription or rent to use the platform for a specific time. So if you need to use it for elongated time, you just need to renew your subscription. So that's what a SaaS model is. So before we move ahead, let me introduce myself. So I call myself the SaaSy engineer. That's because I've collaborated on multiple SaaS platforms, such as our IAM platform, payment portal, and Helpdesk. I'm also a coder and a gamer. Those are my primary interests. Without further ado, let's see today's agenda, where we'll be covering the basics of single-tenant and multi-tenant instances and how we can basically design our own SaaS. So I have created a checklist that we'll be going through today. Okay. So let's see what a single-tenant architecture is. It's basically the application deployment and all its resources will be separate for each customer or your tenant. So that means each tenant will have complete control over their own setup, over their own installation. That means you can customize it as per your requirement and it will provide a reliable performance. Obviously, it will be more costly because as from a business perspective, it will be more costly since for all your customers, you need to deploy separate instances for the application. Right? Some examples of this are Oracle Cloud and I think ServiceNow as well. So you can relate this to a neighborhood community where everyone have their own housing building and they can customize their house as per their requirement. This is all well and good. However, this model doesn't work for everyone. That's because of few challenges that I have listed here. First is the complex management. That means since you're deploying it for every customer individually, the learning curve involved in managing it can be quite difficult. So let's say a new employee joins your company, you will need to give them a key to how this customer setup is done and everything. Expensive infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, you will be deploying the complete application for each of your customers individually. That means their RAM, database and everything you need to manage separately. So obviously it will be expensive. Underutilized resources. Let's say your application takes around 30 GB of storage, 6 GB of RAM for its average performance. Let's say there is a tenant who has a very less number of users, 5 users. So only 2 GB of RAM, for example, will be utilized for this customer. The remaining will be just a waste. To overcome these challenges, many companies move towards the multi-tenant architecture, in which the same installation in database and all the resources will be shared by different customers. In this case, the onboarding will be very streamlined and the customers can just self-register themselves and start using your application. You can relate this to an apartment building where different tenants basically share the same building, as you can see here. Some examples are, actually there are a lot of examples. All the subscription application that you're using, Dropbox, YouTube, Netflix, everything are multi-tenant SaaS platforms. Okay, so basically in contrast to what we saw in the single tenant, let's see how multi-tenant is better. So as you can see, the efficient use of computing resources. That means, as I mentioned the earlier example where few resources will be underutilized for a particular customer, here that scenario won't happen because the same resources will be shared by all your customers, right? So even if one customer is underutilizing it, there will always be another customer who will be using those resources. Of course, it is easy maintenance and upgrade. That means you can roll out the upgrade for all your customer at one go. You will just need to upgrade your deployment and it will be basically present to all the customers. Similarly for third-party integration. In single tenant architecture, what would happen? If there is a third-party integration that the customer wants, they will first need to wait for you or the business owner to basically integrate it at their environment before they can start using it. But that's not the case in multi-tenant. They can just add that third-party integration on the server, and it will be available to all the customers. Fast scaling of resources. We'll see how scaling is done in multi-tenant, but basically it is very fast, and you can specifically choose what resources you want to scale. You do not need to scale the complete application at one go. Let's say you have a database requirement that you need to scale. So you will just need to scale the database. All the memory and CPU storage will remain as it is. It is obviously very cost effective because you are not setting it up for every customer individually. Rapid onboarding, as I mentioned, almost all the SaaS platform provide a self-registration system. So the customer can just register themselves, provide an email address, and they can just start using it. Okay, so till now we have understood what a multi-tenant SaaS platform is. So let's see how you can design your own. Why is this important is because I know that everyone here is an engineer or they are a student. So everyone must have an idea that they want to convert into an actual product. Few years ago, when I had to convert an idea into an actual product, I faced a lot of difficulties. There were a lot of jargons that I need to first understood. What does this means? How can I convert the idea into an application? What are all the intricacies involved in it? So today we'll be covering few of those, and we can understand how we can design a secure multi-tenant SaaS platform. So we'll be going over this checklist. First is achieving multi-tenancy. So in order to achieve multi-tenancy, we need to first identify what a tenant means for us, what a tenant means to our business case. Then we will see how we can isolate them. Okay. So let's first identify what our business model is. Either it's B2B or it can be a B2C. In B2B model, that's basically business to business model, your customers are different businesses. So mostly the tenants are different organization or even departments or team within that organization. Okay. In this case, mostly you'll need to cover regulatory compliances or some SLOs such as uptime and availability. Some examples you can see: AWS, Salesforce, Slack, Shopify, because different organizations are using this application, right? So let's go to B2C now. B2C is basically where the business customers are individual users, or they can be families or even a group of friends. Let's say you have a YouTube subscription for your family or even for yourself. That means you are a tenant, or your family is one tenant for this business, for YouTube. Okay. Here you need to be concerned about data protection law, how you protect your customers' data. And that's it. Basically, Netflix, YouTube, Discord, and Duolingo are some of the examples that I mentioned here. But you might be knowing that there are a lot of such examples. Okay, so we have identified our tenant. Now let's see how we can isolate them. Why isolation is important? Because I mentioned that all the customer will be using the same resources. That means it is possible that all the customers' data will be present in the same database. That's why it's very important to isolate the data, isolate the tenant from each other. Isolation doesn't really mean authentication and authorization. It doesn't mean that I am authenticated with user 1 and I cannot access user 2 data. That means I have achieved tenant isolation. No, that's not that. In contrast to that, isolation doesn't necessarily mean that I'll need to use two separate databases. Okay, those are basically two completely opposite point of the spectrum. So I have listed here 4 models: silo model, pool model, bridge model, and tiered model. We'll be going through this one by one. First is the virtualization or silo model. This is mostly used in single tenant SaaS platform, not really in multi-tenant. Here, basically the tenants are divided into cluster, and each tenant have their own set of resources, just like we saw in multi-tenant. Basically, it is very costly. You'll need to set up the web app, the microservice database, and all the CPU and memory, everything for each tenant separate. In contrast to this, there is the pool model, which is completely opposite to that we just saw. Here, all the tenants' information will be present in the same infrastructure, in the same database. So the microservice compute resources and all the databases will be shared by all the tenants. It is very cost efficient because the same infrastructure can be shared. You do not need to set it up for each tenant separately. However, it is prone to a very common issue called as noisy neighbor. We saw the example of an apartment, right? If let's say one of the tenant is making a lot of noise, it will be inconvenient for other tenants. Similarly, if let's say one of the tenants is overutilizing resources, it will negatively impact the experience of other tenants. That's called noisy neighbor issue. Okay, it is very prone to that. Third model is bridge model. It comes somewhere in between silo and pool model. Here what you will do is you will separate some of the resources while keeping some of the resources shared. Let's say for in this example, the deployment itself was shared, but the deployments are separate, but the databases are shared. It can be vice versa also, depending on your use case. Okay. Then we have the tiered model. Well, it is mostly towards the business perspective. You all of you must know AWS EC2 instances, right? By default, AWS EC2 are free. Just like in free subscription, you can see that tenant A and B shared the same instances. So AWS EC2 are also shared between multi-tenants. However, AWS also provides dedicated instances for a higher pricing. Just like in premium subscription, you can see tenant C has complete control over their instance. It is completely separate from tenant A and B. It can be mostly used in cases where, let's say, some of your customers has very, very secure data that they want to protect and don't want to share it with other tenants. So they mostly go with these kind of higher tier. Okay. So with that, we have achieved multi-tenancy. If you are just starting out, you have just built your application, I would recommend you to go with the pool model, where all your resources will be shared by all your tenants. Okay. Then as your business grow, you can either choose the bridge model or the tiered model, or even a combination of both as per your business requirement. Now let's see another important aspect of multi-tenant is scalability. Why scalability is needed is because of resource strain. Resource strain is, let's say, just like the noisy neighbor issue. If one tenant is monopolizing the CPU, the memory, or any other resources, then there is a need to scale those resources. In order to achieve scalability, you need to introduce microservice architecture, container orchestration, and database isolation. Okay, I'll go over these one by one, but I won't be covering too much detail into these because, as you know, these topics would require a completely separate session in themselves. So let's first see microservices. Well, microservices is basically just dividing your large application into smaller parts, and each of this part will have their own realms of responsibilities. Okay, it provides a very important feature called decentralized service discovery, which is very important for scaling. That means you can scale one particular tenant as per your requirement. One particular service as per your requirement. Let's say in here I have given an example of a help desk application. I have segregated in different services. One is user service, ticket service, and notification service. User service can be used to basically manage my users. There can be multiple type of user, agents or customer. In help desk, there is that process of ticket creation and providing support to customer. So user service will just manage the user. Ticket service will basically handle all the tickets, messages, and everything. Obviously, their database will be different. In Microsoft's architecture, each service typically has their own database. And then third is notification service, which basically handles the outgoing email or incoming email. Okay. Second is container orchestration. Containerization basically means packaging your application along with its dependency into a container. Okay, all of you must have heard about Docker. So Docker is a containerization tool. Orchestration basically means how you will deploy that container into Kubernetes or EKS. Then it's not just that how you will deploy. It also entails what will happen when something goes down, how you will scale it. So you see all the features for Kubernetes provide self-healing, automated rollbacks, auto-scaling, and load balancing as well. Some example of orchestration tools are Kubernetes, Docker, Swarm. Let's say, for example, in my application, there is a tenant who has a lot of support ticket requests and my database is completely filled, or my service is not able to handle the large amount of requests. So there is a need for just scaling this particular service. I don't want to scale the complete application because that would be too costly for my business. So what I will do, since this is running on a completely separate Kubernetes pod, I will just replicate it into another pod, and it will be able to accept more more requests. Sorry. So that's what the importance of is orchestration. Third is database isolation. So database isolation is very important for any kind of scalability. That's because you must be able to identify how your data is stored, and when you will scale it, how your data will be changed, or you need to make sure your customer's data won't get modified. Okay, it won't get affected. So there are three models: shared, dedicated, and sharded. Shared is basically all the tenants share the same database, and there's just a column identifier that's used to separate the tenants from each other. It's quite basic, but yeah, a lot of applications do that. Then there is dedicated, where each tenant have their own dedicated database. It's a good way to good way to isolate the tenant's data. However, it can be quite costly because as your company grows, as more customers join into your application, you will need to increase the number of databases as well. Third is sharded. What happens in sharded model is the tenant's data is basically spread across movable shards into all the databases that you have. Now, since the shards are movable, you can just move them to a more performant database, more highly performance database to scale it. Okay. Sharding, I won't go too deep into sharding, but let's take, for example, you have a column called amount. Okay. Let's say it's list down all the pricing of your products. So you can divide into shards. Let's say I have a shard for pricing from $1 to $10, then or $1 to $100. Then a different shard will have $100 to $200. Like that. So that's about database isolation. And with all these three properties, you can scale your application as per your requirement. Okay. With that, we have achieved scalability as well. Third is analytics. So analytics, why analytics is important is because you need to identify how your application is performing. Is anything wrong with it? Are customers able to utilize it properly? Is it going down? You should be able to identify it. So I've written out few metrics here. One is memory and storage usage, active tenants per subscription tier, periods of increased activity. You should be able to identify when your application is being utilized by a lot of customers. And you will need to see if it's working properly in that load. Okay. Then there is expenses, how much expenses you have incurred into your application and how much revenue you are gaining from it. Is your business getting profitable? So all these metrics will help you in deciding that. And based on this, you can either scale your application and decide your next steps in your business. Okay. Then onboarding. Why onboarding is important? Because you have in multi-tenant SaaS platform, it should be easy to use. Customers should be able to register themselves and start using the application. And even if they face any issues, you should be providing self-help resources or documentation or even proper support channels so that they can reach out. That's why onboarding is very important. So all these points you need to take care of. Oh, okay. I missed one more point that is tenant configuration. Tenant configuration is basically how you will customize your own tenant experience, your own customer experience. So it is important because one size doesn't fit all. Okay. The customer should be able to provide their own company's branding, their own colors and everything. Okay. Obviously, some customer will have different policies, data retention policies, so we'll need to clear that as well. Yeah. So all of these points will basically help you in designing a multi-tenant SaaS platform. You'll need to cover. This is just a checklist that you'll need to cover while designing it. So the first step of security, as Sushma ma'am mentioned, security by design. So if you design it properly, then going further you will be able to secure it. One more important topic I would like to cover is some security practices. So if you would have attended all the session or most of the sessions here, you would have come across a lot of terminologies such as how you can protect against XSS attack or CSRF attack or SSRF attacks. Terms such as data validation, rate limiting to protect your application. Okay. Apart from those, I have written a few points here that you can start from the design phase itself. First is open design. Remember that just because your design is out in the public, your application design is out in the public, doesn't mean it should jeopardize your security. Netflix design is out in the public. That doesn't mean you can basically hack it. Okay? Basically, that's how secure your application needs to be. Second is fail-safe default. That just means that security-sensitive operation should only happen when certain conditions are met and fail otherwise. Let's take an example. There is an API that deletes a user. Okay. You need to check in your API that this operation should only happen when the user is admin. Otherwise, it should fail. So that basically means fail-safe default. Okay. Then there is confidentiality, how your data is protected and how it cannot be shared by anyone else, how your access level is defined for the data. Okay. Then there is least privilege. Least privilege just means a user or a program must have only that level of access which it requires and nothing more. If a user should have the access to view a user, it should not have access to edit the user or anything else. Okay. Then no caching of access control decisions. This is important because you should never cache access control decisions. Let's take an example. I have changed a user privilege. Let's say earlier they used to delete the user, but now they can also, I have removed the delete user privilege and now they can just edit the user or view it. Okay. But if you cache the privilege level, next time they are coming in, it's possible that your system will pick the value, the privilege label from the cache itself, not the actual database. So it will think that the user can still delete the user. The admin can still delete the user, however it cannot because we have modified it to just edit. Okay, I guess that was it. Do you have any questions? Anyone have any questions? Yeah, sure.
Sorry. So there are cases where different governments have different laws regarding where data should be stored.
Let's say I want to build a SaaS platform covering the entire world. United States has CCPA, Europe has GDPR, which requires the data to be stored there. How would I go on defining actual data storage? Maybe I define databases, or how do I store that data securely in a customer's own region? How do I go about thinking that?
So you will need to first figure out what exactly the data retention policy or the data protection law is in that country, for example. It's possible that you cannot have a same infrastructure for all the countries. It's definitely possible. So in that case, what you will need to do is you can have a country-specific setups. For let's say US have a different setup and EU have the different setup, and you can have the infrastructure level. You can define the databases as per that country's law.
So basically, will I have different application servers connected to different databases, and all of that will be separately, all of that will be isolated from another, let's say my application cluster which is stored in Europe? Is there a possibility to have, let's say, one application server, but databases are various depending on the geographical region?
Okay, you're just saying that the application instance will be same, but the databases will be different. Database will be stored in or will be present in different regions, right?
Yes.
It is definitely possible, but it will basically hamper your performance because from US region instance, it will try to access the EU region database. So it will be ideal if you also set up the instance in EU region or Australia region. So basically move the whole cluster there, and based on the customer region, you can redirect into the specific requirement. Okay. Anyone has any other questions? Okay, you can scan this QR code to provide any feedback. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you.